Kyle, you're on mute. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. While Kyle figures out his audio, great way to start a presentation. But here we're here to talk about navigating QMS adoption, and both Kyle and I are going to be walking you through that, and we're really excited to talk to you today. So, first I want to start by introducing myself. My name's Tom Budreau. I'm a VP of Sales Operations and Channel Development at ETQ, and I've been with ETQ, part of Hexagon, for almost 7 years. And during my time here, I've helped hundreds of quality buyers run their QMS evaluation process. Much of that time has been focused on building a program to enable quality buyers to build consensus within their own organization around a QMS project, which is why I'm very excited to cover this topic with you today. So I want to tell you a little bit more about ETQ. So, we've had a market-leading QMS product for over the last 30 years called Reliance, and we sell and support a wide range of industries and geographies, and we have over 1 million users, and we deliver that all from the cloud. So ETQ Reliance is, the world's most configurable and flexible QMS, and provides a scalable and adaptable solution for businesses who are really looking to improve, decision velocity, optimizing supplier quality, improving efficiencies in their quality processes, and even reducing the cost of poor quality or accelerating time to market with their products. Kyle? All right, it looks like we may have lost Kyle, so maybe we can come back to introducing Kyle in a moment. All right, we're just going to get into this. So, in a 2019 survey of more than 250 B2B customers, Gartner found that 77% of those participants rated their purchase experience as extremely complex or difficult. The complexity of making a decision can be largely attributed to increasing number of buying group stakeholders, an abundance of high quality but sometimes conflicting information available to buyers as well. According to research, today's buying groups are made up of, on average, somewhere between 5 and 10 people, which is actually now believed to be closer to 10 or 15, which is pretty crazy. And, it's the diversity of responsibilities, points of view, and different authority levels among these individual buyers that creates conflict and sometimes buyer dysfunction. Gartner also found that, this seemingly massive buying group, somewhere between 5 to 10 or even over 10, hard to believe, may have 4 to 5 sources of information that, all of these stakeholders must deconflict together. And what's more, 95% of buying groups are reporting having to go back and revisit decisions at least once as new information arises throughout their buying process.
Hey, Tom, can you hear me now? Just checking as we're going through.
Yeah, yes, we can. Welcome back.
All right, great. Thank you.
Kyle, I figure, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Brief pause on the microphone issue, but I'm glad we got that sorted. So I'm Kyle Rose. I'm president and CEO of Rook Quality Systems. Rook Quality Systems is a consulting firm based in Atlanta, but we have consultants around the US. We also have a branch in Taiwan and a branch in Europe. And we support all types of medical device companies with their quality and regulatory needs. This includes ISO certification, FDA compliance, MDD to MDR transition, design control, risk management, all of these broad range of scope of quality and regulatory activities for medical device companies. We have a handful of certified auditors on our team, so 13 certified auditors as well as a team of over 35 quality engineers. And we provide quality mentorship to all types of medical device incubators and groups around the world. I'm really excited to be on the webinar today, hosting with Tom, and now that we got everything working on the AV side. A little bit more about Rook Quality Systems. So we help everybody from early stage startups to Fortune 500 medical device companies working to implement quality systems, identify the best eQMS as we're talking about today, audit support, both internal audits as well as if you're getting audited by the FDA or for your ISO certification. We have a very dedicated and knowledgeable software team as well. So we do a lot with medical device software validation, eQMS validation, all of these activities within the software scope. We have software engineers that can support, as well as international regulatory system submissions and quality system training. So very excited to give some information today about how we help companies with the implementation process of an eQMS. Back to you, Tom.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. So, Kyle, while you were out, we were talking about how, Gartner produced that survey that said, 77% of buyers were explaining that it was really difficult to buy B2B software or any project for that matter. And a lot of that was because of the increasing number of stakeholders. But, Gartner then followed up that study and conducted a survey of, 3,000 customer stakeholders, individual stakeholders involved in recent B2B purchases they made. During that time, they found that going from 1 to 2 decision makers only dramatically dropped purchase likelihood from 81% all the way down to 55%, a 26% cliff. Yet when 6 people were involved, purchase likelihood dropped even lower into the mid-30s. So we, again, go back to 5 to 10 stakeholders, you can see how this can start to have an impact on purchasing decisions. Yet eliminating certain decision makers from the buying process not only challenges the likelihood of a purchase being approved, but puts a successful implementation at risk. All the stakeholders must buy into a new solution along the way at some point. And, people might be wondering, why is this becoming a problem? And when you break it down, it actually does make a lot of sense, right? There's 7 factors that are responsible for a growing number of stakeholders in today's B2B purchasing decisions. First, there's just an aversion to risk by different stakeholders in their organizations. Secondly, obviously with technology advancements and also advancements in the reasons why you would need security, IT teams and security teams have significant considerations, and that also involves folks in operations and procurement. They want to make sure that they're buying a robust and secure solution that meets their organization needs. There's obviously tighter regulatory requirements and information protocols from legal and compliance officers. There's governmental, regulatory considerations, right, and reforms. I think, we talk about how if you're a US-based manufacturer, you've been subject to over 1.5 new regulations per week over the last 5 years. And of course, this is especially true if you're in a heavily regulated industry like medical device or pharma, for example. Globalization. Globalization is huge because you now have businesses that span the globe who have sites all over who are now needing to, or rightfully, adopting the same quality processes maybe as their headquarters, but you need to wrangle all the different regulations across all those different geographies. You have an integration of customer functions and tasks within the solutions themselves, right? You have different departments leveraging the same solution for a common good. And then finally, you have flat networked organizations who place a premium on cross-silo collaboration, right? You have different groups who need to work together to break down silos in order to move forward with one solution. So, in this multi-stakeholder buying environment, right? Often the only things that buying groups can agree on is just, minimizing risk, avoiding disruption, and, likely winding up with the status quo and saving money. On their own, without any help, buying groups rarely agree on something that is, disruptive or ambitious or forward-thinking. And if not working properly together, they might make a decision on something without even thinking it through. And if they do make a decision, but they're not working together, they might be putting a successful implementation at risk, which nobody wants, of course.
Yeah, good point, Tom. And that kind of leads to my slide where, the implementation phase can be tough, right? It's getting the decision point first is very hard, especially with the stakeholder and kind of the current landscape. There's a lot of eQMS options, and it's very hard to find the one that's the best fit, but also going through the evaluation process and all that can be tricky as well, just to narrow down the scope to get to ones that are a better fit for your company. Rook QS has supported all types and sizes of company when evaluating eQMS, and we've learned quite a few things that have helped us and help us with our clients kind of narrow down the process, as well as best practices to say this will help you be successful when you're going through the evaluation process and you make a decision getting ready to implement. There's a lot of things that companies have done that have made the process longer or harder than it should be. And so we're going to make sure that everybody listening today and everybody listening in the future can take these tips and make sure that they have a successful evaluation and then implementation process, right? It is kind of the goal for both the eQMS vendor like ETQ as well as the med device company to want to be successful, right? They both have the same target in mind, that we want to get to see eQMS, we want to have it work for our company, and we want to make sure that everybody's happy when that's finally implemented. So there's a lot of ways that we can work with the clients, the med device companies, as well as the eQMS vendors to make sure this is a beneficial process for everybody. We have seen some of kind of the worst case scenarios would happen quite a bit. So it's want to make sure that you take away things from this webinar that prevent you from being in this situation. Some of the most common ones we've seen is companies signing up for an eQMS. They went through the buying phase, they picked one that they seen was the best fit, but then they never actually got through implementation. So they end up paying for this eQMS solution for multiple years, but they're not actually using it. They're still maintaining their paper-based or legacy system, paying for the expensive eQMS tool, which is a big investment, but they don't ever actually use it, right? So that's kind of the worst case scenario. Doesn't benefit anybody. The client's not happy, the eQMS vendor's not happy, so definitely don't want that. Another one that we've seen quite a bit is companies implementing a new eQMS but not updating any of their internal procedures or work instructions to match that eQMS vendor, right? So as you transition, you're going to have new workflows, new processes. All of that needs to be properly documented in your internal documentation to make sure when you show your external auditor from the FDA or your notified body that you have compliance in place and it's matching what is in your procedures. As Tom said, it's getting to the point where there's more and more stakeholders involved with this process, right? So it's harder to find one solution that everybody agrees on, right? Everybody will have the kind of solution that best fits their scope, you know, whether it's engineering versus quality versus validation. They might all have their own perspective and supplier on what's best for them. So it can end up where, you know, half the team's not happy, half is. So it's really trying to find a solution that makes everyone happy, or at least has some benefits for each person, so that we can all move forward as a kind of collective team with this new eQMS tool. Another big gap we've seen in implementation is the lack of validation, right? So with these eQMS tools, there is a specific requirement in ISO 13485 that says you have to validate your software tools and evaluate them for validation. So making sure you have that validation in place, but then also updated as there are changes through the process for your eQMS. And then the big one we see, and this is definitely coming from a consultant, is a lot of companies thinking the eQMS is going to run their quality system for them, right? Where you always still need a quality manager or quality consultant or somebody in there actually doing the work inside the eQMS. The eQMS is not a solution that handles all your compliance and everything automatically gets updated and signed off and trained. You still have to have somebody in there running the actual eQMS for you. So that's another kind of big gap we've seen on the implementation side. I want to make sure companies are aware of going in, so it leads to a more successful implementation phase. Both parties, like I said, want it to be successful, so we're going to give some more tips on that process as well.
Awesome, thanks, Kyle. So now that we've officially scared everyone and told you how hard it is to buy and how hard it is to implement and get it right, you know, all joking aside, you know, if you have a great game plan, this isn't that hard, right? And so by the end of today's section, you should really know how to run a productive eQMS evaluation with the goal of, you know, partnering with the best vendor for your business. You should know how to create a foolproof implementation plan so that you and your business can feel really confident that you're going to see positive business outcomes and mitigate risk at the same time. And finally, we'll discuss how to maximize the ROI on your quality investment, right? We want to make sure you're getting the most out of your quality management system. So we're really excited about this topic and we hope you enjoy. So, let's get started. As previously mentioned, ETQ has been in the quality management space for over 30 years, right? And during the time, we studied how organizations buy quality management systems. I've personally witnessed, hundreds of eQMS evaluations that result in a successful outcome. I've also seen some that haven't, right? So I've learned some stuff, and we've mapped out the process of how these companies ran proper evaluations, the ones that actually brought a system in-house and worked really well. And it can generally be broken down into 4 stages. First is the buyer, and you'll hear me refer to the buyer, but what I'm really referring to is the entire buyer organization, right? So first, the business recognizes that they have a real business problem that requires solving and has an idea on what positive business outcomes they're seeking. Second is they collaborate cross-functionally and determine what type of solution is required to solve that problem from the first step. Next, they take the time to identify viable solutions. How well these solutions meet the needs documented in that prior step, and begin mapping out an implementation and rollout plan as well. And then finally, they make a determination on which solution best meets their needs and how to gain approval and make the purchase. But have you ever heard anyone say you learn from your successes, but even more from your failures? And like I said before, I've learned a ton from those as well. And that feedback has been pivotal in our buyer enablement process that I'll talk about today. So next, we're going to talk to you about how each of these stages work in detail and what the most successful buyers have done to really put a solid foundation in place, and what have they needed from vendors, and what tools and resources you should be using at your discretion to make your life easier in the evaluation process. All right, starting with recognizing pain, which is, in my opinion, probably the most critical stage in the entire buying process, because if done correctly, it really sets a strong foundation for the later stages, and it helps rally the troops within your own organization around a common cause. As previously described, this is when the buying entity is really defining what their untenable business problem is and rallying multiple stakeholders around that common problem. And a few examples of this related to quality management might be, the business is struggling to produce high quality products and services like it should know how, or they're already producing really high quality products and services, but it's costing way too much to do so, right? It's indefensible. Like lots of scrap and rework, or warranty costs, or field failure costs, for example. Second, the business is struggling to maintain compliance already, or maybe it's growing rapidly, right? It's got a ton of funding, and you got to open up new sites and new geographies, and there's a lot of risk involved in doing so, and you want to make sure that you can maintain compliance as you scale. Or another one is, there's difficulty managing product quality, and it's stemming from suppliers, right? Like maybe you have a product that includes tens, hundreds, thousands of supplier parts, but you don't really have any way to really onboard, track and manage, or even rate the suppliers that are in your supply chain going into your final product. Successful businesses that I've seen, successful businesses start with why always. What's the problem that we need to solve, and what are the critical business metrics that are supporting that problem statement? And then even more so, what are the real life examples that we can call upon that are supporting that problem statement? For example, I worked with a medical device company, and they estimated that their current manual paper-based process was costing them roughly $20 million a year in scrap, rework, and returns, and probably another $5 million in revenues due to a damaged brand reputation that they have from putting bad product out in the market. They supplemented that statement, right? So they talk about the problem, which is we're putting bad product out in the market. They had the business metrics that supported that and saying, dollars and cents behind that problem. And then they put a real life example in front of their senior decision makers. They used an example where they shipped custom hand sanitizers to a customer in Australia that was worth $500,000, the size of that order. The buyer inspected these products and started using them, and basically right after shipment, they identified that a material percentage of those products were actually faulty and they weren't working properly. It actually cost more to fund the returns to get all those materials back to the States than it was to just pay the customer money to dispose of them. So that's ultimately what the company ended up doing. And think about having to defend that, right? Hey, we shipped $500,000 worth of faulty products over to Australia, and now we just have to leave them there and actually pay for the customer to get rid of them because we don't want to ship them back. It's this story that actually earned the back from their senior decision makers at the customer that ultimately ended up funding the budget for this project. So, what the customer needed then was just a stakeholder map, right? They needed to identify who are all the people from our business that need to be a part of this project that we need to work with, not only to define the problem, but who are also going to help us define what that solution might look like. How are we going to determine what our needs are? So this typically includes folks, obviously, from quality management, supply chain, IT, and even operations that are likely going to be required in order to help define the project itself. All right, moving on to the next stage, which is determine needs. And it's exactly what it sounds like, right? This is when the buying group is collectively defining criteria that it's going to use to identify and evaluate solutions against in later stages. And the type of criteria that we typically see and how they're bucketed is first in technical criteria. So think about things like which applications, or some people refer to them as modules, are required in order to solve this problem, right? Not only attributes the system has to have to ensure they can solve the problem, but problems they're likely to run into in the future. So think like configurability or scalability if the business is growing, for example, or specific security requirements that the IT team has for the solution. Another is business criteria. So think about if the company's ultimately partnering with a third-party vendor, right? What are some of the must-haves in that relationship? Think about strong customer experience with a consultative implementation team, for example, right? Like we actually want to learn from the folks who are helping us implement our system, who can make recommendations based on their experiences. Maybe a training and knowledge base, right? A learning portal where our teams can go to learn and adopt on how to use the system. And then even for once in a while users who really need help in figuring out how to use something, they can go in and just quickly learn themselves. So it's scalable. Or a strong reputation in the market, right? Think about customer proof points, right? When we find a vendor that we really want to partner with, do they have customers who speak highly about them and can tell you about their experience working with that vendor, which obviously I think is extremely important. So, think about if we're going to make a sizable investment from a time and money perspective, this has to be a vendor that we feel really comfortable working with and we can trust. And typically, successful business outcomes successful businesses will document this criteria in a checklist of sorts. Think about documenting this in an Excel file or a Word document and storing it in the cloud for each team to have access and visibility to, and can also collaborate on with you as the project lead. And if your procurement team requires RFPs, well, you actually just made everyone's lives a lot easier because you've already documented what you're looking for in this system. And before I talk about the next recommended tool, for those of you in the audience who have ever purchased a home, I want you to think about the first home you ever bought. If you were me, you required a mortgage, and getting that mortgage has many steps, if you remember, and all those steps happen in a fairly compressed time frame. There were multiple parties involved. It was my wife and I, my real estate agent, my mortgage broker. There's the bank, the home inspector. Probably think I'm forgetting a few people. The real estate lawyer. There we go. I'm probably missing a couple. All these stakeholders, including ourselves, had a critical and unique responsibility that needed to be completed in a certain order and time frame in order to ensure an on-time and successful close of my first home. Fortunately, my mortgage broker provided me with a series of expected steps, owners and dates, and what he called a mutual action plan. This document really helped set expectations for all parties involved and kept us all accountable to our responsibilities in achieving our common goal, helping us move into our new house on Christmas Eve, which was a personal goal of mine that I was bonded and determined to do. And I don't know if I would have been able to do it without having that mutual action plan that my mortgage broker provided. So, this action plan is applicable for any project, even a QMS evaluation. So, this is something we highly recommend you collaborate on cross-functionally with different stakeholders in your organization and even your vendor as well. It should include key milestones, assigned owners, and projected dates. It should always end in a successful go live for you and your organization, the most important milestone in that project. All right, and then the third stage in the buying process, which is actually evaluating solutions. And it's here where you're going to discover, who are the various QMS vendors that you can partner with. You're going to evaluate them against your key decision criteria that you established in that prior stage to determine needs. You're going to begin forming an implementation plan, and you're also going to be building a business case with robust financial justification for a potential solution of choice. So during this stage, it's key that you develop a vendor scorecard, right? That's going to help you assess vendors' performance relative to the decision criteria, but even more at a granular level, like how did they grade in the demo, right? What was the consultative nature of the sales and services team? What were some risks that we identified in engaging with the vendor or that we heard about or read about online? Everyone gets a feeling about which solution is the best fit, but it's really important that you have some sort of objective measure that goes beyond your feelings, especially when explaining why to a senior decision maker. And another helpful tool in this process is a decision process map. And this is probably one of the most forgotten steps in the process, right? Like, who from your business is going to need to be involved in stamping the approval for a signed contract and purchase order? In what order do these people need to approve the project for? And what type of information are they going to need in order to provide you with a decision? How long are each of these steps going to take from each one of these stakeholders? And when you add all that up, how does that align to your go live timeline? These are really critical steps to ensure that you keep the project moving on your desired speed. Now, let's face it, between global conflict, rising interest rates, and supply chain challenges, the last couple of years have yielded plenty of economic uncertainty, right? And with that, CFOs are scrutinizing commercial investments more than ever before. It's not that they're not spending money per se, it's just that, if they are going to spend money, they better have confidence that, a real business problem exists. This is a solution that's actually going to solve our problems, and there's sound financial justification that are backing that argument. I know I've personally seen, and we as a business have seen, tons of projects backed by real business problems that get shut down, because that head of quality was unable to furnish a financial justification for the project. And without it, the CFO can't rationalize that spend. And that's why you'll really need a business case that addresses the problem, but most importantly, it's backed by a strong and robust ROI analysis. And this ROI analysis should summarize things like, what's the return on the project, obviously, but then, how quickly will we break even on the project, right? So if this is a 3-year subscription, for example, and we're going to implement in the first, 10 to 12 weeks of that 3 years, when are we actually going to see the money that we paid return? And then, probably most importantly, what are the top drivers that are bringing that return, right? Do I believe in those things, and are they aligned to the problems that we described at the beginning of the business plan? And finally, one of the most crucial steps in the process is an implementation plan, which Kyle is going to walk you through next.
Thanks, Tom. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just double checking. All right, so yeah, we made the decision. We went through all the buying. We got the sign off from the C-level people, and everybody's ready to go. So the next phase of this eQMS journey is implementation. This is, one of the big focus for any company. It's something that can go wrong, as we talked about a little earlier. So we want to make sure that everybody here today has some tips they can use to kind of really dive into this process, make sure it's working for their company and their team, and make sure it's going through in a timeline that works for everybody. So as Tom mentioned, really, one of the key steps is making this implementation plan. And when I say implementation plan, this is something that should be documented. It's something that should have a Gantt chart or a timeline that breaks down when each of these activities is going to be completed. So going from the initial training with the eQMS vendor through the final document upload, you should have kind of these key steps outlined in your implementation plan. At this stage of the creation of the plan, you also want to walk through with this team and identify what the priorities are for the different modules or sections of the eQMS. Most of the eQMS tools these nowadays have different sections. So you have your change management, your CAPA, and your audit, and your supplier assessment. And some of those might be bigger pain points for your company currently. And a lot of these are the reasons why you decided to move to eQMS in the first place, right? So identifying what these key pain points are, whether it's your CAPA process, your NC, your training process, and then prioritizing those with the implementation of those modules first is really a good practice to get that up and running and get everybody feeling confident in this new purchase that the company has made. A next key step for the implementation would be prioritization of the SOPs and work instructions being documented. So as we discussed earlier, one of the key gaps is not updating your procedures. You're going to make sure you realize upfront that you do have to update probably a lot of your internal SOPs and work instructions, and you'll need to align that with the use of the eQMS. A lot of times companies, the ETQ and other eQMS vendors will have some of this already pre-populated. You can use some of their templates to kind of implement that into your quality system, but you do need to plan for that and for those updates and the required changes. They'll be associated with signing off on those documents. And then one of the other key things is defining the record upload strategy and timeline. Depending on how long your company's been in business, how many different products you have on the market, there could be a limited scope of a few hundred records, or it could be, tens of thousands or more, right? So identifying how you plan to upload these records, what records might not get transitioned into the new eQMS, and which ones might stay back in a legacy system or just a repository or paper, needs to be defined in this implementation plan. So these are kind of the key areas that actually lead to getting things done. Kind of high level, we still need to identify the project lead and the team supporting this eQMS implementation. So having somebody that is a point person and is going to be leading this process through completion is really key for this implementation plan. Documenting this in a formal project plan, whether that's a quality plan or another related QMS document, is really important both for internal process to make sure it's being done, but also for any external stakeholders as well. So if you are going to have an audit during this phase, or just having some of the high-level C-level people reviewing, you need to have this document so you can show progress with your implementation when it's being asked. So making sure that not only you have it fully documented as part of your quality system, but that you also update this implementation plan during each phase. So as you get things completed, making sure you're showing that this was done and having the proof that you're making progress with implementation. And then another key aspect is to set regular meetings, right? In order to make sure you're making progress, it's really important to have regular meetings set and set goals to those meeting times so that you make sure that every week or every other week that you're addressing this and moving forward. One thing that I think gets missed a lot is that the eQMS is going to improve efficiency and it's going to make things easier to do in your quality system, and that's kind of the main goal. But if you don't have a plan in place, things can get behind and you can kind of lose progress on your implementation. Also, kind of the day-to-day quality work and the day-to-day regulatory work doesn't stop just because you purchased an eQMS. So you still have to account for all the other day-to-day responsibilities with this implementation plan. So being realistic around how quickly and how much time you can use from your internal employees and any external consultants should also go into this planning and scoping phase as well. Next key kind of topic for the implementation planning will be the change management. This is one of the key modules for any eQMS tool is the use of a new change management that's typically different from your paper change management or your legacy change management. And each EQ and a lot of tools these can be configured and customized specifically for your company and how you like to do change management. So make sure you have a review of your current change management process to see if it's compliant first, but also efficient to make sure if there's any opportunities for improvement. This is another thing that we always push our clients as we're helping them with implementation is to take a step back and look at any of the current pain points or issues they're having with compliance to see if those can be improved during this transition and implementation phase. So having an idea to look back either independently in your quality system or having a third-party consultant do an audit or a gap analysis more focused on efficiency. And these are things that you can push as to improvements that go along with the eQMS. So you're not only using the improved efficiency of the eQMS, you're also improving the workflow and the practices that improve compliance and really kind of help your company moving forward. One of the key decision points that we see companies when they're doing this is determining whether or not document changes and engineering changes are in the same workflow. So kind of like the DCO, ECO process. Some companies like to keep it together. Some companies like to split it. So making sure you review that process and how it aligns with eQMS to determine if you're going to keep those together or separate. There's no right or wrong way with compliance. Both can be compliant. It's just finding out what's the best solution for your team and your workflow. And then if you are going with a split process for different engineering and software changes, making sure that that's documented in your workflow as well as your procedures, and make sure that it complements the complexity of your product and your process. So changes and change control and design changes for a class 3 product are going to have a slightly different review and regulatory concern than a lower risk class 1 product. So making sure that you align your compliance and your change control with that. This can also include defining approval requirements for different types of changes. So aligning with these types of roles, whether it's quality engineer, regulatory manager, marketing, have to sign off on these types of changes. Some of that work can be built into your eQMS as well. So making sure that you have this process and this plan set up and is formally thought out and documented, and then transition into your eQMS during this implementation phase. Another key aspect to make sure you are successful with the implementation is the talent strategy. So as I mentioned earlier, as you're implementing this eQMS, there's not a pause button that says all the other day-to-day quality and regulatory work just gets put on hold while you're doing this transition. You're still going to have your feedback and your complaints and your potential audits and your new regulatory deadlines. All of these things are still going on in the back end as you're trying to implement this eQMS. So it's really important that you have a talent strategy going in and you identify the roles and responsibilities of the team that's going to implement this eQMS solution. This is a good time to also determine if external support is needed in the implementation phase. So this is where a team like Rook comes in and helps a lot of companies with their implementation to make sure it's successful. With the use of external groups, they can be used to upload SOPs, records, manage implementation timelines while the internal quality team is doing their day-to-day responsibility. So Rook has come in these situations and been very successful in saying, hey, we're familiar with your eQMS tool that you just purchased. We're going to jump in and help you manage this process and lead this implementation planning and timeline to make sure you're being successful. Our experience, we have experience in TQ and many other eQMS solutions, so we also have some experience of best practices on how to make sure that you are configuring it and setting it up in the best way possible. So it's also a good opportunity to have feedback from other people who have used the system in a day-to-day scenario to make sure that you can use some of that tips and tricks and knowledge when you're implementing your eQMS as well. Also, just the bandwidth, right? So having the external group supporting you provides additional bandwidth to move the process and really show to your decision makers and your key stakeholders that you are moving forward on time with this process. Even if there are slight delays or unforeseen quality regulatory, you still have an external group that can help you move through this. The success group, your eQMS solution, also very helpful in this talent strategy to make sure you're leveraging as well as you're going through the implementation. And even though you might want to lead the majority of this, external groups can still help with a limited scope, whether it's just high volume document upload or final validation. Those are other things that can be beneficial to use an outside support like Rook with your implementation as well. The consideration of the planning, right? So the timeline effort. So it's important to identify all of the different modules and requirements needed to implement and validate eQMS. So there are multiple things that will be going on as you're going through this process to make sure that you have this implemented and in line with your company's requirements and expectations. And as you're planning out, these kind of can be considered with this process, but also as you're going through the process. So timeline to implement the EQS modules. So working not only with your internal company to get sound expectations, but also working with the ETQ or eQMS vendor to identify what they would recommend as reasonable timelines to implement. Determine the validation requirements and timeline. So depending on if there's any configuration or customization or just an out-of-the-box solution, there's different requirements for validation. So make sure that you ask these questions during the evaluation phase, but also then plan for them during your implementation to make sure you're successful. If you are going to need additional validation support, make sure you plan for that as well. These are also good questions to ask during the during the sourcing phase to identify what the validation requirements are. I know talking with Tom, they offer multiple packages with the validation, more of a white glove, a template, or referencing an external validation company. So there are multiple options. It really depends on what's the best fit for your company, your bandwidth, and if you are using an external consultant. Post-implementation support is also very key to identify what costing timelines and effort you'll need to see how much support you'll have going forward. You also want to plan around other company milestones. So if you do have a regulatory submission you're planning later on that year or a standard transition, we know QMSR just got a lot of the MDR final timelines are going in right now. So make sure that you plan around these milestones with your implementation planning is important as well. The internal and external audits, those can happen at any time, whether that's an unannounced audit from the FDA or your CE mark auditor. So making sure that you have plans around your scheduled internal and external audits, but also an unannounced audit. We have talked about earlier about having a formal document that shows this plan and updating it. So that is one of the things that you can show to an auditor, say, hey, we are in a transition phase for our QMS. We have decided to purchase this eQMS vendor. It's really going to improve our client compliance and efficiency, but we're in the middle of this phase. So we'll show you kind of where we're at now, show you our plan, show you our records, but you have that formal document that you can show to them. We've also seen a situation where companies were implementing an eQMS and that company got acquired, and potentially the acquisition company was also implementing an eQMS, right? So there's multiple layers where this can happen. So make sure if you are in talks or plan to get acquired, that you have that aligned with your implementation of your eQMS as well. So it's really important that you plan accordingly when you're doing this implementation and throughout the phase for everything else that can happen during this process. Typically, you know, we're seeing anywhere from 3 to 9 months of implementation or longer for bigger companies. So you want to make sure that you have plans around this implementation phase and timeline. And then kind of last thing on the implementation would be the training and adoption plan. So As we talked about, there will be multiple stakeholders likely with your company. So you want to make sure that during this implementation that you are getting insight from everybody as far as how things will be set up, but also you want to help make sure that you're getting buy-in from all these stakeholders. You want to make sure that they are still engaged and involved in the process of implementation to ensure that you are having a high level of adoption, and that when you are up and running, everybody's using the eQMS, everybody's enjoying this new process, this new software solution. As we talked about, great time to evaluate current processes to determine if there are ways to improve inefficiencies that can be resolved either with new modules, new procedures, or new eQMS workflows. That's very key for this process. You have the opportunity now. There's things you've been working on in the past saying, oh, this is always a pain, we should fix it. Take the time now to fix it as you're implementing your eQMS. A lot of eQMS vendors now also offer integration to other tools, right? So if you're using a Jira or something like that for your software development, you might be able to directly integrate that with your eQMS via API or direct integration. Same thing if you have a CRM, there's a lot of ways that you can connect your CRM to build that feedback into your complaint process. So looking at ways to connect current tools or systems that you might already be using is also important for this training and adoption. A phased approach to each module, so making sure you have a plan for each module and then requirements for training. Identify kind of your final transition date. This is good for kind of just high level compliance so that you know that we're no longer running change requests in this other system. We want to move everything into ETQ and make sure that everybody knows we're not trying to duplicate efforts, right? So not having signatures in two places, make sure that at this date, end of May, we're going to be running all our CAPAs in ETQ and all our training and all our stuff. So really having that set date to push things over. One thing we've seen as well is just plan for overtraining and encourage questions. Everybody picks up new software at different pace, right? So making sure that you have a plan to train everybody on the team, record your training and your onboarding sessions for future references and future employees, and really make sure that everyone is involved and confident in this new ETQ solution. And then again, leverage customer success and external consultants. So make sure you have, when you have the opportunity, especially with the people that you might have brought on during this phase, you get all the questions, all the tips, all the stuff from them while you can. So those are some of our best tips for implementation.
Awesome, Kyle. That was great. All right, I know everyone's psyched and is ready to buy some QMS software, right? But this is the last but not least stage in the buying journey. It's selection and procurement, right? You're assuming that everyone's completed each stage as described, right? You've now gotten all the hard work out of the way, and you put yourself in the best position for the project to be approved and mitigated from an implementation perspective. But just like in an interview process where you found a candidate that seems like the best for the job, you should always ask for references. Why? Because anyone can fake it till they make it, right? They can look really good for 4 to 5 hours in an interview process, but what's really more important is how are they going to perform over the next 2 years? And the best way to gain some confidence here is to speak with someone who's worked with them before and who can speak about their work ethic, what are their strengths or even their weaknesses before partnering with them. And why would a vendor be any different? This is a great way for you to gain confidence and even your senior decision makers to gain confidence in your decision around the partner that you're going to be working with for the next several years. And, with that being said, of course, just like in a job interview, I wouldn't want a potential employer of mine to call my former boss five different times for reference calls. So, really businesses should be reaching a conclusion on which vendor they want to partner with. And then that reference call is really just a proof point on that decision, or conversely, only a poor reference should really undo the decision that you reached in that evaluation process if done appropriately. Simultaneously to the references calls that you're going to be making, you're going to want to kick off that contract review. Typically, this process runs smoothly, but in the event that there's something unique about your business that creates questions in the contracts, it's really best to address those as early as possible in the buying journey to ensure that it doesn't delay your intended project kickoff. And finally, we talked about how you're going to need a decision process map, but now it's time to actually execute on those steps. Luckily, you're equipped with all the ammo that you're going to need in order to get those approvals, like a strong business case backed by an ROI analysis that's going to help you build consensus and give confidence to those senior decision makers in that decision process, like a CFO, for example. And like I said, if done properly, if you've done all your homework, you're putting your team in the best possible position to earn signatures and a PO for your solution of choice. And now we're going to talk a little bit about, okay, so like you've picked your vendor, right? And you've made that selection and you've signed contracts and you've been awarded your PO. We're going to talk about how to gain ROI on your investment. So obviously I'm beginning to sound a little bit like a broken record. I realize that, but assuming you've executed every step in the buying journey as described previously, you should clearly define a problem statement that's untenable for your business. You would have documented a decision criteria checklist with a solution that meets the criteria and solves the original business problem that you had described. And you have a really well thought out implementation plan, like Kyle described, with internal stakeholders ready to create positive business change for the business. And if you've done all this, you've established a foundation for success. But what else can you do on top of that? Or what can the vendor do afterwards to ensure it comes to fruition? Well, first, we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but you want to make sure that you're partnering with someone who has really consultative services team members who can guide you on best practices, make recommendations based on their prior experience in working with buyers like you in your industry, and help you keep the project on track ultimately. And ultimately, this should be a team that you can productively collaborate with in a trustworthy manner. Second, it's critical that your team is ready to use the solution. So Kyle talked a little bit about this in adoption, but this includes administrators, this includes super users, or even once in a while users. But how do you prepare everyone? What's the vendor going to do to help you get there? It starts with training. Ideally, the vendor has some sort of online learning portal where all these different stakeholders of various types can go in and learn through their unique role and in using the system. And this portal should be readily accessible by all stakeholders at any given time. It should be set up and structured in a manner that has learning tracks that are tailored to the different user types that you may have. And it should be continuously updated to address not only the applications and use cases that you're leveraging the system for, but future product innovation, right? Staying up to the times of what the product's doing today. And with this, you'll ensure that your team's ready to use and adopt the system as it's intended. And obviously, after your solution is fully implemented, in the event your system administrator needs help with the product, you're going to need a strong vendor support team who's ready to jump in and help you solve any challenges that may arise. And then finally, wouldn't it be nice if there was someone at the vendor who actually cares about your success and even the return on your investment, right? How many people have worked with a salesperson who just drops off and you're like, okay, now I have the solution, but who's actually looking after my adoption and success of the solution that I've just paid for? And that's ultimately what customer success is for, right? Your vendor of choice should have someone who's dedicated, someone that you can go to with questions, ask for recommendations, and be able to guide you through the adoption and operational best practices to ensure that you're maximizing the return on your quality investment. Customer success is going to be your day-to-day partner, to be your guide and your advocate within the vendor organization. And once again, if you've executed all of the buying stages, with the steps and the tools and the resources that we've described, and you partner with the right vendor that brings all these resources to the table, you have a great recipe. You're really setting yourself up for quality management success. And before we go here, there are a few resources that we'd like to provide. We actually have a section of our website called Your Game Plan, which is dedicated to enabling quality champions in the buying process. And it includes recommendations on things like how to approach each stage of the journey. It provides tools and resources such as decision criteria checklists, like I mentioned before, or even an RFP template for a quality management system. And Kyle has another great resource here. Kyle, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, similar. So we have a resource on our website, link here, that aligns with your QMS requirements or eQMS requirements to rate how to kind of align software agile practices with your QMS. So it's a great resource as well for anybody that is a SAMD or a software company.
Awesome. All right. Well, with about 5 minutes left, we'd encourage you to either enter any questions that you may have via chat, or even take yourself on mute and ask us both questions Kyle and I prepared. But even if you don't get an opportunity to ask that question now, or you want to save it till later, please feel free to reach out to us. We've put our emails on here, and you could also contact our companies through the websites that we've also listed here as well. But really appreciate your time here.
Yep, and I don't know if we covered it at the start, but this has been recorded. We will share a recording and slides with everybody after the webinar as well. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Let's see if we have any questions coming in. Is there a training certificate? Yeah, we can send a certificate. If you just email me, I can send you a certificate on here if you would like that.
All right. Any other questions? Going once, going twice.
Let's see, we saw how many people as a super user. So I think that's more around how would you set up as like how many people would be an admin versus super user, things like that. Do you want to take that, Tom?
Yeah, sure. Ultimately it depends on what you're leveraging the system for, right? Which use cases do you have? All eQMS systems are a little bit different how they manage users. Like I know us, we have admins, and then we have full users and reader users. So think about admins are folks obviously that need to go in and adjust profiles and settings and set up reports and things of that nature. Then you have full users who are people who are going to need to be able to edit, approve, think about like documents or trainings or things of that nature. And then we have reader users who are really only folks who need to consume information within the system. Think about folks who only need to go in and get trained on a new SOP or work instruction. So, I mean, those are extremely tailorable and, again, adjust based on what their role is and which use cases that you're leveraging your eQMS for. Is what I would recommend.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things too in the planning phase is to identify kind of how many users you'll need and what different type, right? Because that goes into the quote process, and so that's something you can do kind of as you're getting ready before you even start talking to someone. Is just looking internally, how many admins do we need, how many full users, light users, stuff like that. I think is a good process to have that information ready as you start to evaluate your eQMS tools.
Exactly. And maybe one other step I'd add there is, there are some vendors who have kind of a named user model where you actually have to know everyone by name who's going to be logging into the system, which I find fairly challenging. And others will have a more, concurrent user model where you can have a little bit of leeway in who's logging into the system at any given time, because especially depending on the use cases you have, you won't know how often people are supposed to be logging in at any given time to a degree. And so that really helps having that flexibility. All right, we probably have time for one more question if there is one.
What is, okay, let's see if I can beat this. I have issues. It says, what is the optimal approach for integrating an eQMS into an established paper-based system that's already successful? Is there a straightforward method to adapt current quality processes to interface with the eQMS without extensive revisions?
Yeah, so I think if you already have a really successful manual paper-based system, congratulations, that's awesome, right? You may not need an eQMS, and that's great. The only thing I'd say is if you still are interested in one, or I can think of, hey, look, we're growing, we're scaling, our manual paper-based system works today. Will it work in our business next year? And so maybe you're ready to make that leap because you want to digitize all of your critical processes within your business. That's awesome. And that will make your project a lot easier, right? Because you already have best practices likely built into your quality management framework. And now all you need to do is get those in an electronic system, right? So they can better talk to one another. And really, you're talking about productivity savings from that standpoint, because you're going to be taking a lot less manual steps, and you'll have a much lower likelihood that there's going to be any sort of inconsistencies in your processes or data.
Yeah, I think that's something we see a lot is companies that do have an efficient paper-based QMS are a little concerned that they're going to lose something when they transition. I have not seen that be how it turns out. I think there's a lot of efficiencies just tied to the electronic QMS that all types of companies would benefit from, even if you already have a compliant and efficient paper-based. I think there's definitely ways to improve efficiency with electronic signatures, electronic storage, working with anybody that might not be directly in the office. Remote work's much more common nowadays. So all these things with an eQMS are much easier than a paper-based.
And perhaps I answered that question poorly, but one other thing I'd add there is, like, if your processes work really well and you feel as though I don't want to adopt somebody else's best practices, I feel as though we have best practices, well, then you're going to want to partner with a vendor that has a flexible and configurable platform to meet your processes where they are, not bucket you into their processes. So I think that would be my recommendation, is if you're ready to make that leap and you really like the way things are done at your business, of course, you can listen to consultants tell you what they think you should do, but ultimately the system should be able to map to do whatever you want it to do.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Tom, HEQ, for hosting.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. Thanks, everyone. Take care.